Labour Minister Dr. Nanda Gopal, continuing his testimony at the ongoing Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry, said it is clear from his personal experience as a trade unionist that political scholar Dr. Walter Rodney was assassinated by the People's National Congress government and that the party's leader, Forbes Burnham, had a personal hand in the act. Dr. Gopal told the Commission of Inquiry that on the day of Dr. Rodney's death, he felt anger that such a magnificent and brilliant son of the soil lost his life in such a crude manner. Asked about his feelings towards the PNC given what he personally endured, Dr. Gopal said he holds no malice against the party. However, he called on politicians to ensure that nothing of this nature ever happens again in the country.
That based on what I have said in these proceedings, what I have seen as an activist, as one who attended the rallies, as one who listened to statements made, that Dr. Walter Rodney was assassinated by the leadership of the People's National Congress, and that Mr. Burnham had a hand in that assassination, and that either they acted by themselves or with the help of the security forces of the country. I'm convinced about that. My firm belief, sir.
On the 13th of June 1980, where were you on that date?
I was at home.
You were at home. And how did you learn about the death of Dr. Rodney?
From the news, from colleagues, coming around telling me.
Had you ever known anyone by the name of Gregory Smith?
No, not at all.
Had you seen the reports with the picture of somebody bearing the name Gregory Smith?
Yes, after
and
that.
You saw the picture?
Yes.
In what publication?
I would have seen it in newspapers, and other articles.
All right. You can't recall exactly, but you would have seen the picture.
Yes, I would have seen the picture.
And the picture of the individual bearing the name Gregory Smith, had you ever seen that person before?
No, not at all.
Okay. Could you tell us what, if anything, NACI participated in after the death of Dr. Rodney?
Well, following the death of Dr. Rodney, at the funeral, we mobilized our members. We had asked members to apply for leave because under their contractual obligation with employers, they can have casual leave for a funeral. And we did ask our members because we wanted to show our solidarity with the family. We assembled at Buxton, where there was going to be a march from Buxton right on to the Tiger Bay area, and then the body would have been interred at the Lirpentere Cemetery. Many of us, hundreds of our members and thousands of Guyanese participated in that march.
Could you give an approximate figure as to how many people were present during that march?
There were at times up to between 15 to 25,000 persons in the march and funeral.
Did you have any fears on that day while you were part of that march?
Not fear, anger.
Why were you angry? Or why did you feel anger?
That the life of a brilliant son, someone who was loved by so many, could have been snuffed out in that way, that manner.
Dr. Gopal, before I end my examination of you, I wish to ask you, having testified at length about your personal experiences, both as being a member, an executive member of NACI, and your own personal, what you viewed as personal attacks by the government of the day, that is the PNC Burnham-led administration. How do you now feel about the PNC?
I hold absolutely no malice. And if you were to go through the last chapter of my book, and it's my firm belief that Guyana belongs to all its people, that no single race nor no single political party can be engaged in the development of this country, and that all the political parties must play a role. And I believe that we must see what happened to Dr. Rodney as something that should never, ever happen in this country, ever, ever again. And that this should be a lesson, that as leaders of political party, we should work together for this country's development. We should all play our role. We should criticize each other, but we should be able to do so in a manner that is decent and in a manner that can be considered civil. The only way Guyana can be developed is if we work together.
He testified that opposition parties, persons engaged in peaceful picketing, and members of the trade unions during the 1978 to 1980 period were seen as counter-revolutionaries by the People's National Congress leader, Forbes Burnham. The minister said the PNC paramountcy dominated the security sectors, with the then Police Commissioner Lloyd Barker and Guyana Defense Force Chief of Staff Norman McLean photographed in the front row of the PNC's third biennial Congress in 1979. 2 articles from the Guyana Chronicle were tendered into evidence.
You also laid over to the Commission a second article. Where is the second article? That was dated the 22nd day of August 1979. Isn't that so? Copies of these were in fact laid over yesterday. Could you just have a look at that copy? Now, this particular article also comes from the Guyana Chronicle, isn't that so?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is the title of this article?
Yes.
What is the title of the article?
Crucial Congress opens today.
Now, at this point in time, where did you get this copy that you laid over?
This was from the Chronicle archives.
And for the same reasons as stated before, you were only able to provide us with a photocopy.
That's right.
As such, my respectful application would be to have this document, a copy of the article dated the 22nd day of August 1979, taken from the Guyana Chronicle, be tendered and marked as an exhibit within these proceedings. NKG6, suggested tag.
Yes, we are now receiving it into evidence and giving it the suggested tag.
Now, in this...
NKG 6.
6.
Yes.
Now, in this article, Dr. Gopal, reference was made to what was going to be discussed at the biennial Congress. Isn't that so?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And what were they talking about? Perhaps I will direct you to 1, 2, 3, the 4th paragraph. Or you can read from the 3rd paragraph,
Yes.
as Comrade Burnham
Comrade
explained.
Burnham explained in his Congress message published in the last weekend issue of the New Nation. The Congress is being held at a time, I'm quoting, when reactionary and counter-revolutionary elements are joining forces in an unholy alliance to thwart the people's victory and to trample on the gains made over the years under the vanguard leadership of the People's National Congress.
Continue, and coming.
And coming as it does in the wake of a number of significant events, the Congress will no doubt will mount in-depth and serious discussions of these events, in particular the burning down and firebombing of the party secretariat on July 11, and the recent and continuing attempts at disrupting the already fragile national economy.
Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Gopal, in both articles, reference was made to counter-revolutionaries. Now, exactly who would have been these counter-revolutionaries referred to by Comrade Burnham?
Persons who were engaged in peaceful picketing at that time and strike activities. As you notice under the article
KG7.
in the newspaper there were reference to strikes ending in the bauxite and in the sugar industry.
The former trade unionist told commissioners that freedom of assembly was curtailed, the right to free and fair elections was denied with many rigged national elections, and workers were deprived of joining a trade union of their choice. Dr. Gopal said that revolutionary Dr. Walter Rodney's role was to break the cycle of fear that was created by the Burnham regime during that era. He further recounted that citizens' right to travel was restricted. If one was to travel, permission had to be sought from the Ministry of Finance to access personal bank accounts, and scholarship students suffered due to the strict rules that governed overseas travel.
It's all well and good to itemize them, but what effect, if any, did the combination of the denial of all those rights and freedoms had on the Guyanese society? How did it manifest itself?
It was clearly a situation where there was massive oppression of the people by the state, massive oppression. It was an indication that the state had absolute control over the lives of people, and fear stalked the land. Absolute fear there was, and Walter Rodney's role was to break that cycle of fear. Oppression and discrimination.
Could you explain what you mean when you say Walter Rodney's role was to break the cycle of fear? What did he do?
Because of his meetings, public statements, and fearless stance publicly among large gatherings of Guyanese.
So you're telling me...
That was unseen prior to.
I see.
One of the restrictions you itemize is the right to travel. During the period 78 to 80, I think it is a notorious fact that a lot of Guyanese have migrated from a long time, maybe in the 60s, even up to now. During that period, if, like relatives sponsoring relatives back home, were they allowed to leave, or there was a denial of that right?
They were allowed to leave, but they could not leave with their belongings, assuming you had a bank account of $5 million or $100,000. There was restriction on what money you could take. At one time, it was $15 that you could have taken out. And another time, for you to take out money, you had to go to the Ministry of Finance and have them, or the Bank of Guyana, sorry, and have them endorse your passport and stamp it and said permission is granted for you to take out $50 US.
But what about students traveling abroad to study?
Or unless, but very often, students traveling could not get money, could not get funding. There were occasions when even government scholarship holders were denied funding, several of whom did not come back into the country because the government had not concluded the payment of their fees, school fees. They had to get families to pay, and very often they did not return to the country. But we knew, and I knew because I was the permanent secretary at the Public Service Ministry, which was the agency that was giving scholarships.
And what year was that?
I became permanent secretary in 1999, but the files were all there. Several files of students not returning because they were not in receipt of allowances and stipends which had been agreed upon. So it wasn't merely the normal and the average Guyanese, even those who were scholarship holders, some of whom were denied because their payments have not been remitted.
The former trade unionist said the 1978 referendum had severe irregularities.
The low poll facilitated the work of observers who were easily able to identify persons who were returning several times, since these were often the only people voting. The following list of irregularities were observed in many parts of the country. Although multiple voting may have been more voluminous in Georgetown, the phenomenon was universal. Irregularities observed were persons voting more than once, recycling of voters to different polling stations, use of government vehicles to carry people to vote. Persons...
No, I was just observing that polling was left out, but you mentioned it. The different stations, I assume it meant polling stations, but you did insert what was not there. Go ahead.
Continue, Dr. Gopal.
Votes opened by... Sorry.
Persons voting outside of their own.
Sorry.
We're at number 4, the fourth one. Persons voting.
Persons voting outside of their own electoral district. Votes opened by the presiding officers. People refused ballot papers on grounds that they had already voted when this was untrue. Voting by children and young people under 18 years of age. Non-staining of voters' fingers. No verification of voters' identity. Voting after polling station had closed.
Those sound like 2011 elections. Which year are you talking
Voting multiple times by polling station officers. Collection of boxes by armed soldiers. Polling agents ordered out of stations. The observation of this report basically is that the referendum of 1978 was massively rigged. There was a massive boycott call, and it was supported by not only the political opposition parties, but by many of the civic organizations in the country, including prominent churches and trade unions.
Dr. Gopal, from the very report under the same section we are reading excerpt from Monitor's report, I wish to direct you to page 48, where it says under the heading Rogers Residence Buxton, and in the margin, votes opened. Could you read what the Monitor recorded happened at Rogers Residence Buxton at page 48?
The Rogers residence at Buxton, votes open. One lady, pressured into voting for herself and her daughter, voted 2 noes. Her ballots were opened in her presence and destroyed.
A report on the 1978 referendum titled Something to Remember was also tendered and entered into evidence. Assistant Lead Counsel to the Commission went thoroughly through the document with Dr. Gopal.
So just as a matter of completeness of the records, Dr. Gopal, could you read that section for us? Referendum symbols on page 21.
The government unilaterally assigned the symbols of a house to yes vote and a mouse to no vote. The symbol of the mouse was repudiated by the opposition groups as intimidatory, prejudicial, and inimical to fair and impartial conduct of the referendum.
And you would observe that on page 22 of this document, there's actually a depiction of what the house and the mouse on the ballot may have looked like.
That's right.
Is that what the actual ballot looked like?
That's right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gopal. I wish to now direct you to page 53 of the document.
Page 53.
53. Could you read for us, starting under the heading Queenstown Roman Catholic School, Georgetown?
Voting between 6 a.m. and 4 p.m. was low. Rampant rigging started about 4 p.m. Open self-contempt. The people were sardined in and out of Land Rovers, minibuses, etc. Much finger-sucking and wiping. Average voting time of person, 10 seconds. The voting stamp was heard 30 times for every 7 or 8 voters who needed no ID cards, propaganda, photographs taken during this crowded period.
Continue after 6 p.m.
After 6 p.m., 7 people turned up in PAA 6. Some other numbers there. After the top flat had closed. As they couldn't get in, they went downstairs and voted often. A man in a blue car, PZ5, etc., was connected with this, I think. One man who mentioned that he had not been registered in his district was merely told by one of the boys to go to the fire station. Estimated numbers of repeaters, about 200.
On the cross-examination by the PNC attorney Basil Williams, Dr. Gopal stated emphatically that the Guyana Agricultural and General Workers Union, GAWU, was not affiliated with the People's Progressive Party, as suggested by Williams. The Labour Minister maintained that GAWU was an independent trade union and represented workers across the spectrum. Williams sought to discredit the evidence by Dr. Gopal that the PNC attempted to muzzle the unions.
The travesty of the TUC conference was one in which a large union like GAWU with 15,000 members, formidable representation, was denied representation on the council of the TUC.
Now, it is true to say you were concerned about the control of the Guyana Trade Union Congress.
No, I was concerned with the undemocratic and misuse of delegates by inflated means, the use of the Ministry of National Mobilization to pay dues for unions that are paper unions and increase their delegate strength based on that. That is what I was concerned. That was what the 4 unions were concerned with.
But then the TUC rules, we'll have to get a copy. Then those rules make provision for membership, attendance at conference?
Yes, it does.
So I'm not sure what you're talking about, inflation.
No, I'm talking, if you inflate your members, if you have, like, for example, sir, the Association of Masters and Mistresses got 28 members, but they registered 700. It means that they got more delegates than what they were entitled to. And we only knew when it came to an affidavit which they had to swear in the courts, that they swore to the General Secretary said, and if they were to change the rules, a small union like the AMM with 28 members would be affected. And that let the cat out of the bag. Immediately we knew. Then secondly, sir, when they filed their returns to the deeds registry, I personally went into the registry, went into the records and found that the records which they stated as their membership was not the records which they register at the TUC. And the financial...
Dr. Gopal, I will have to stop you. My question to you was, did the rules determine representation at the conference?
The rules determined representation.
At the conference?
Yes, but the rules were observed
Now,
in breach.
Did you participate in those conferences?
Yes, I did.
You did?
Yes.
Even though you're saying the membership was inflated?
But we raised objection there. We've been fighting at the TUC level, sir, ma'am. We did not want to break a TUC. We wanted to keep a united body. We wanted to keep a united body. And therefore, we were agitating, we were hoping for change. The manipulation started immediately after 1975.
All right, but just answer my question. Now, because there were 24 affiliates, the voting was according to the number 24.
The voting?
Yes.
Yes, based.
So I don't know what you're talking about, inflated membership. If you have 24 affiliates, the vote of the 24 affiliates...
No, it's based on membership of these 24 affiliates.
And so you, day in, year out, continue to participate, even though you felt that the process was flawed?
Oh, year in, year out, I did indicate that we did not want to break the solidarity of the movement.
Assistant Lead Counsel to the Commission, Lashmi Rahamat, summed up the day's proceedings.
We saw Mr. Gopal completing his evidence-in-chief. In completion of his evidence-in-chief, we saw he tendering a few important documents which were referred to during his examination-in-chief. These were articles that were published in the Guyana Chronicle since August of 1979, when the PNC held their third biennial Congress. And what is significant about these articles is that on the 24th of August 1979, the publication had a picture depicting, according to the witness, the front row, which was seated the then Commissioner of Police Lloyd Barker, and also the then Chief of the Army Staff, Mr. Norman McLean. The witness was asked what the attire of these two gentlemen were wearing at the time, and the witness indicated that from the picture it appears as though they were wearing their uniform. The witness in the box was asked what is the significance of this, and he indicated that it was morally and ethically wrong that the armed forces and the head of these armed forces ought not to have been in attendance of any political party's Congress, much less in their full uniform attire. We saw also the beginning of the cross-examination of Dr. Gopal, where he was asked questions in relation to whether the strikes referred to yesterday in 1979 and the 135 days strike, whether those strikes were actually politically motivated. And Dr. Gopal maintained that these strikes were not politically motivated, although they were labeled by the PNC administration as being politically motivated. But he indicated and he maintained throughout the cross-examination thus far that these strikes were purely industrial relations strike, dealing with industrial issues concerning and affecting workers. We also saw him tendering two other documents which I wish to refer to, and these are the report which was done by concerned citizens of Guyana in relation to the referendum that was held in July of 1978. The referendum, as we have all been hearing through the witnesses that have been led so far, was held in order to have the Constitution changed. There was outspread and a wide range of views on the Constitution and the proposed changes in the Constitution. And what actually occurred is that essentially the opposition, the PPP, and also the unions came out in opposition to the reform, to the referendum, and there was a widespread call for a boycott of the referendum. Essentially, the report highlighted that there was mass rigging and that the outcome and the official results of the referendum was actually not a clear indication of what transpired. I think the report labeled it as massive fraud in relation to the numbers that were portrayed on the official results of the referendum versus what the observers actually saw. We saw Dr. Gopal reading from this report some particular excerpts coming from monitors and what they would have observed on the polling day, and highlighting that there were people voting more than once, people going from different polling stations and voting on the same day more than once. He also saw children were voting, and there was also even an excerpt coming from the observer's report where it showed that there was a ploy to have PNC supporters gather and pictures taken, and those pictures were then subsequently published. Obviously, if you have a crowd or 20 people gather together and you take pictures, then that picture is published. It is to give the impression that there was indeed this massive turnout. However, before the report started, they noted that because of the low turnout, it was easy for the observers to note the faces and the same people coming again and not voting once or twice, but voting several times in excess. Now, throughout the years, we've always heard that both the referendum and the elections were rigged, but now you have an independent report highlighting what these independent observers were taking note of on the day when the referendum was carried out. We also saw a report coming from the British Parliamentary Human Rights Group, and this report was in observation in relation to the December 1980 elections. Yes, this was after the death of Walter Rodney, but what it goes to show is that even after Dr. Rodney died, the circumstances surrounding the oppressive regime were still very much in force and still very much prevalent. Because what this report noted in its conclusion is that there was mass rigging, and what they indicated clearly is that the fraud was on such a scale that it could not have been hidden both from the Guyanese and even from the international observers. So again, what Dr. Gopal was indicating is that the society was such that the oppression, the paramountcy of the parties, taken together with these threats that were coming from Mr. Burnham, he said clearly, he said he does not have any doubt and he personally believes that it was the Burnham-led administration who orchestrated the death of Dr. Walter Rodney. And he even spoke very emphatically in relation to why he believes that by the end of 1979, Guyana was operating on a full-scale dictatorship. He went into detail to highlight and identify the various fundamental rights of Guyanese, basic fundamental rights that ought to have been guaranteed to each and every Guyanese, and how these particular rights were being violated, in addition to giving examples. And for these reasons, Dr. Gopal has spoken with conviction, and he has spoken from his own personal experiences. And let's not forget how he ended, because he indicated that no matter what happened, he would like everybody to remember that we need to work together. And I do not think that the message that Dr. Gopal has sent in relation to the other issues that were operating between 1978 and 1980 should go unnoticed. And I'm very sure that the commissioners will take note of that. And whatever is, whatever will come from any findings, we will have to wait to see.